operate. And so this is not anything that is required for you. It's just extra bonus. And so I'm going to flip through some slides. I'm going to be very quick. We're going to hold this to 15 or 20 minutes, this presentation, and that'll mean that we will just gloss over this. This is basically a PowerPoint that I would use to explain the whole outline of a class that I would teach that would maybe take a whole semester. So this is like a preventive counseling class in 20 minutes that would normally take a whole semester. And so one of the first things I want to just mention to you is one of the works that profoundly impacted me. And Nicole, I don't know if you've ever seen this slide. So in 1972, a way long time ago, I was a kid. I was a young kid. I should say I wasn't born yet, but I was. There's this dimension of counselor functioning. Now, some of you may have heard of like the cube when it comes to like social advocacy works. And actually, they totally borrowed this cube from that and applied it to advocacy competencies. And so when I first saw this cube, it was such a liberating experience for me because I realized that there was a whole world of counseling outside of what we normally think of. And I wanted it. And so, if you look at like target of interventions, most of us spend our life in our training programs, and the work we do is all right there on number one, A1, individual work. So we're trained to sit with a client and be empathic and help them develop a treatment plan and reach their goals. But there's other ways that we can function as a counselor. And so we can think not only about the individual, but we can think about like a primary group. So we can think about maybe this would be where family work would come into play. And so you can target interventions at not just an individual, but you could target interventions at maybe like a family. You could even think about like other roles as a counselor, targeting interventions or work that you do at like a larger level, and this is like an associated group. So maybe think about like a student in a classroom. How would you work with the whole class, or how would you work with the teacher regarding that student? Or how would you, in a church setting, how could you work with the church, right, to help as a way of doing intervention work? And then, of course, you can even take that lens out further. Think about what is it like to function as a counselor at an institutional or community level. So this could be things like helping to shape policies, helping to shape legislation. And I know that as stuff that's right down your bailiwick and the kind of training that you had. And so I think the counselors have so put themselves in a little box that they forgot that these other like levels of functioning when it comes to interventions are fair game for counselors too. So then the next the quadrant on here is talks about remediation. B, purpose of intervention. So what's your purpose of an intervention? Is it remediation? Is it to help somebody who's come to you with a problem or problems that are existing? Or, as we'd like to focus on today, prevention? Or, like, are you helping maybe from a developmental perspective? So you might think one individual recently employee assistant panels, and so he was called into a corporation where the corporation was going to be going through some rather new coping skills and strategies to the changes that the corporation was going to be facing as it changed. Now, there's not a problem yet. I guess you could almost say this is prevention, but it's developmental. It would develop new skill sets to adapt to what was coming to them. Then, of course, the last levels or method of intervention, C, says, how are you going to do this work? Or is it going to be through direct service? Are you going to sit and work with people more at a consultation or training level? And then even how did we think as counselors about media? And it's interesting, this was written in 1972 when media was like a very, like, how did you get to, like, how do you do commercials in 1972 as a counselor? I don't know, or think about media. But today, with social media, with Facebook, with all the things that we have at our disposal, we should be thinking about media a lot more serious. And so think about how like this potential as a counselor to work at different interventions, targeted and have different purposes, as well as like and thinking about consultation and education at the media level. And so I think these are all ways to think, and it takes what we normally think is a one-dimensional career and makes it a three-dimensional career with a lot of movement and latitude. So this is like the article that I read, and it really just made the counseling field like pop and sound exciting to me. I don't know what your response is to this slide.
Oh, I think it's great. It definitely being in coursework and thinking about micro and macro and specific to macro. Absolutely, and I actually coming from social work into counseling, I've been some of the energy or movement at being more tuned in for advocacy and encouragement for counselors to get involved within their state or recognizing how other issues impact our clients, that we're not just isolated from all the other systems at play. And so it's been kind of fun for me to see that energy and the it just is part of my training and makes sense to me.
So you can find this article. I'd encourage anybody that's watching this to find this article. It's a short article, cube, with a little more than I have time to this morning. So when I think about prevention, I think about truly something being before it occurs. And so this means then that we're talking about incident reduction. So incident reduction means like, again, we suppress, can we reduce the limit of or reduce the number of new cases of a problem? So maybe it's something like new case of depression. Of course, some of you would say some people are probably listening to this one. Well, how would you know if you reduced it if it didn't exist? Well, because this is the area of epidemiology. So the area of epidemiology is all about understanding like what exists and what are the likelihood of new cases continuing to emerge. And so we can actually measure these things. And so we know how many clients show up in a clinic in a given year saying that they're suicidal, or how many clients show up in a clinic saying that they have eating disorders, or whatever it is that you're trying to prevent. Prevention requires an ecological. That just means that everything is interacting with everything. And so we don't sit in isolation, even when we're doing counseling with a client. Our client is a member of multiple systems and wears multiple hats. They are a family member, and maybe they're a member of their work, maybe their schools, their communities, their states. And so thinking about all the presses and all the demands from one's ecology is really important in a prevention. And then that kind of means then that when we do interventions or we think about doing prevention, we're not just working at the individual intervention. So we may be working at the individual, but just as the counseling cube indicates levels of policy change and advocacy, we may be working at levels at the group level and beyond. It requires a collaborative approach to have things done to them as opposed to working with others. And so I think a good science requires working collaboratively. And then, of course, I think good prevention is utilizing a positive strengths-based approach. And play around with this, but this illustration, but well, maybe I will real quick, and I'll skip the next one. On a blanket, a cool beverage, and a good book on the grassy banks of a river below a swimming area. Suddenly you hear a thrashing sound and a cry for help from the river. Startled, you look and see a person and return to the serious business of soaking up the sun. There's no respite for you, however. You find yourself repeating this performance. As you are ministering to the final victim, an observer asks a question that is startlingly powerful in its logic and simplicity. Quote, would it ultimately be much easier and less effectively to swim than to rescue each individual? End of quote. That's from the famous psychologist Rappaport. And so this is a great fable, a great story we could spend a lot of time talking about, but I think it really gets at the topic of prevention. And to take you through this one, but I would say that one of the challenges of doing prevention is if we do go to the watering hole, we have one preventive strategy, but there are other prevention strategies, and they all have like things that need to be considered: minuses and pluses, positives and losses. So, for instance, we just put up a fence that says, and a sign that says no swimming. Well, we're preventing probably people from drowning, but are we then preventing them from developing? Are we overprotecting people to the point where they become dependent? They become dependent on, and they don't learn to do self-care. Maybe so. There's always a balance when we do prevention between um, the gains and the losses that might occur from doing prevention. So I'm going to skip through this. I have in here some slides that talk about just like the sheer problems that exist, and some of these numbers are rather old, but this is a very old number, almost 11 years old, but look at the billions of dollars that are spent on mental health care. So this is really the bulk of what I want to talk about for the next few minutes, Nicole. And so I don't know, did you read in your work, in your social work training, did you read any of the work by George Albee?
Goodness. Possible, I just don't remember.
So George Albee is a famous psychologist. He just passed away a few years ago. And he was not, if you go out and read, thought Christianity was in the way and did a lot more harm in the world. He was very antagonistic, right? George Albee, in spite of his, I think, hatred almost for Christianity, we see if he did anything, that was still profitable. And so God's grace is always abounding, right? Even in the heart of the agnostic or the lost. And so he gave us this great formula. It's known as the incidence reduction formula. And so it says, basically in the numerator, and for those of you that are mathematically challenged, numerator's the top and denominator's the bottom, remember, on your fractions? So he said in the numerator, Albee articulated things that we want to reduce. We want to decrease, like stress and exploitation factors. And in the denominator, these are the things that we want to increase. So we want to increase individuals or people's coping skills. We want to increase their sense of self-worth, their self-esteem. We want to increase the community or the group's sense of support for each other and problems. And so it's really kind of a cool way to think about it. Like, what is it we want to decrease, and what is it we want to increase? And so myself and Bob Canine, we took this formula as we thought about prevention, and we've teased it out a little bit more. And so we have organic factors times environmental challenges. And when we talk about environmental challenges, we talk from environmental stresses, exploitation, and oppression. And so these are, again, all things that we want to look at and examine and put a microscope on and say, what are they and where do they exist? And then how can we reduce and eliminate those? But at the same time, what is it in the denominator that we want to promote and increase? And so we expanded the Albee formula to include personal and interpersonal and group strengths, coping skills, self-efficacy, collective efficacy, support systems, cultural competencies, and advocacy. And what then happens in the rest of this slide presentation is I break each one of these down and have questions for you to help you fill out this. So let's just pick something you wish to deliver a prevention program. So I'm just going to say, how about churches that we could do? We want to prevent. I guess the churches are all good. We want to prevent bullying. Do you think bullying churches?
Sure, I'm
going to guess it does. Yeah. I mean, the church. So the identified population and setting. So we're talking youth, and we're talking, and then we can go through and we can ask So I guess we'd be like maybe looking at like your church or my church, and so we could say within my church, what's the characteristics of the students that attend that? So we could describe them. We could describe them, through everything from like, their socio-political, economic, cultural. Do we have any diversity according along any of these lines? And why is prevention necessary or desirable? Well, I mean, that makes sense. We're Christians. We should be treating each other in the most Christian way. If we can't do that within the church, where can we do that? And so prevention is necessary, and we know that in probably any big church, like a church I attended for a while, it was still a couple thousand people, there has to probably be students that are picking on other students. And it's desirable because kids that are bullied hurt themselves eventually, or sometimes even take their own life to escape, or you're going to fight, flee, or freeze, and those be averted. I think we're kind of alluding to that. And so you see how just this slide can help you like really very put a fine point on what is it you want to prevent, and who's the population you want to prevent with. And now that we have that, we can get into the actual formula. Remember the formula, if I go back here just a few slides, now we're going to look at organic factors. And so I have a series of questions that will take you through organic, environmental, talk you through from the individual to the macro and all these, and then we'll do the same and talk about all the things that we want to decrease, and then all the things that we want to increase in the denominator. So we won't have time for all these, but just to kind of give you a little bit of flavor. So just, again, what are the organic? So what are the physical, mental, and emotional behaviors are demonstrated? So this could be everything from like Down syndrome, lead poisoning, depression. It's just kind of a suggestive list. How do they inhibit functioning, and what is their strength? So if we're talking about prevention of bullying in a let's say a mega church, a giant church, I think we would probably want to describe probably adolescence, wouldn't we? Mm-hmm. What are the characteristics of the adolescence and emotional behavior? So what do we know about adolescence? We know that like taking care of that, like adolescence is like trying to hit a moving target. Right. And so there's some literature that can inform us about working with students and working with adolescents and things like that. What social and environmental stressors, events, circumstances, situations affect their lives and the people in this population? Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, and as I think about high school kids, I'm thinking about major events like proms. And I don't know how it was for you, but when that kind of time came around, I was so glad I played on the tennis and state competitions during prom weekend, and I never had to worry about that stress. And so I was thankful that I never went to my proms because I was always playing tennis. But it's a stressful time, right? Mm-hmm. And kids really, I mean, we're older now, so we look back at it, we giggle. But at the time, those were like major stressors in your life, right? Mm-hmm. So these would be the kind of things maybe you would want to like think about, and as you think, because as you're thinking about a bullying prevention program and preventing kids from being at risk for being bullied. What sources and kinds of exploitations affect their lives? We'll just go through this in a series of questions to help you do that. And then, of course, we're getting into the denominator, the things you want to promote. So what coping skills do members of this population use to manage their life situations? So this could be anything from